Hey, I'm Pierre Vander, and this is the first devlog of my game TEMPOVERDOSE. If you've seen any of my previous games, you might know that I like three things: nice crisp pixel art, addictive gameplay loops, and groovy music. The music is something that is especially brought up by players constantly when they talk about my games. So naturally, I've always wanted to make something where the music is front and center. So, a rhythm game? Well, that might be your first thought when thinking of a musical game. When I was a teenager, I used to play the drums a lot and played a lot of rhythm games. There are tons of different rhythm games, from ones that rely on specific peripherals, to precision clicking games like Osu, minigame collections like Rhythm Heaven, even weird racing abstract nightmares like Thumper. But there's a game I absolutely love, and it does something I haven't seen in any game before or since. Rez, released for the Dreamcast and PlayStation 2 in 2001, and later on as a remastered version called Rez Infinite, is a weird game, but I absolutely love it. At first glance, this might look like a weird 3D shoot 'em up, but you only have to listen to it to get why it's such a unique experience. In Rez, everything is linked to the beat. Every hit is musically tied to the background music, and every sound effect changes based on the level's ambience. When you finish a section, the game goes into a drum break to ease into the next part of the song. The epileptic visuals and old techno soundtrack make for a unique but captivating experience, one that sticks with you and makes you bob your head from start to finish. But it isn't a rhythm game. I'm not sure if there's a specific term for it, but I like to call that a rhythmic game. You don't have to push buttons on the beat, but everything you do reacts to the beat, making the soundscapes uniquely based on what's going on gameplay-wise. And I love this idea. When you think about it, a shoot 'em up can be really musical if you want to. The player shoots regularly, mimicking the constant beat of a kick drum. Enemies have different patterns that can be tied to musical notes, and most shoot 'em up have a pretty hectic drum and bass or breakcore soundtrack, making the game feel hectic and fast-paced. But how can I make something similar that fits my art style and abilities? I needed a plan. So first, making a beat clock. You can't make anything musical without an accurate clock. And if you know a bit about the game engine you're using, that can be quite easy to implement. You basically have to know two things: the tempo of your music, also known as the BPM or beats per minute, and the current time in the song. Now we just have to use music theory. Don't worry, you just have to know a bit about rhythm. Most music uses the beat as their basic time building block, which is for the most part the same as a quarter note. With the tempo of the song, you can find the duration of a single beat by dividing 60 by your BPM. To be a bit more precise, we can further subdivide a beat into 8 sections, or 30-second notes. Then it's just a matter of figuring out every frame if the time in the song goes past the current interval, and emitting an event when it does. Let's call that event onMusicTick. To make things simpler, I also create other events when the clock gets to a beat, a bar, and 4 bars. Now I just have to make things happen when either of those events is sent. For example, I can scale up an object on every beat, or change its color, or I could synchronize a sprite's animation to the game's beat. But some patterns might be more complicated than an event on every beat. Listen to the pattern on the famous Amen break, used in most drum and bass tracks. The drum actually follows this pattern. I can make a Boolean array to specify when I want each object to react to events. With this, I can basically make any pattern I want. I can even mix up patterns to make things more interesting. With that, the basic clock system is done. We can now move on to... One of the things that make Rez unique is the way every sound effect is synced up to the game's beat. This might seem like a simple thing to do once we have our event clock, but that would be wrong. To know why, let's talk about how we perceive sounds, and more specifically, timing. Visually, we perceive things to be synced up with an audio loop as long as the visual stimulus appear within about 40 milliseconds of each other, but our audition is much more sensitive to timing differences. And even more so for musicians, drummers, or rhythm game players. Consider this. The cube does appear to be synced up with the audio loop, but due to the way games actually render frames, if we play an audio clip at the same time we receive onMusicTick event, the sound clip will appear to lag behind. Fortunately, most game engines have a way to play sound effect based on the audio timer rather than the main game loop. This way, by triggering the sound in advance and specifying what exact time we want to wait before playing our sound effect, we can make sure to always play it perfectly in time. This requires a bit of anticipation, as we have to know beforehand if we should play another clip later. We can use the patterns we created to not only check when the beat happens, but also check if the next beat will happen and trigger sounds to be played exactly on time. Now, everything that happens in the game can be a sound effect and played in sync with the music. Enemy shots, explosions, UI clicks, music transitions. At this point, we have the basic framework to make our rhythmic game, and we can now move to... First, let's find a good art style for the game. I obviously want to make something in pixel art, as it is the art style I'm most confident in. But there are many ways to do pixel art. Something I always consider is how complex a certain style is and how many assets or animations we have to create for the game. The more complex an art style is, the more time-consuming it will be to make assets for it. I want to make a shoot 'em up, so let's make the art style as simple as possible, since I will have to create a lot of different enemies, animations and environments to keep each level unique and interesting. The simplest I can do is 1 bit, 2 colors. Easy to create, animate and very legible. Let's just add 2 additional colors. Red for things that can hurt you, for example bullets or specific enemies, and blue for the player and specific UI elements like hearts, important buttons and score pop-ups. Next, let's find a theme for our game's universe. The most cliché thing for a shoot 'em up is to be a spaceship shooting at other spaceships. Since I want the music to be the most important part, I don't want to restrict myself. So let's make a generic smiley face for the player and let myself be as creative as I want on every other aspect. By keeping the lore at the minimum, I can create enemies of any kind. This could be instruments, household objects, animals, abstract shapes, weird creatures, aliens, and so on. Okay, so now that we have a basic player, let's make him move and shoot to the beat. We can then add power-ups for him, like a multi-shot, stronger bullets, shooting more regularly, moving faster, and extra health. I also added a dash ability to avoid incoming threats that reloads slowly over time. With this basic player in place, we can start working on. For this proof of concept, I want to try and make 3 different levels, each one based on a specific music genre. As a rule, let's assume that music with the faster tempos will be harder and more intense. I landed on these 3 genres: house, slow drum and bass, and jungle. I have to build this music a bit differently than if I was just making a standard song. You see, each level will be divided in sections of different intensity, with transitions that leads into the next section. In each section, the player will face waves of enemies and will only move on to the next section once he defeats every enemy and chooses a power-up. Since I don't know how long it will take the player to defeat every enemy or choose a power-up, I have to export every song as individual sections and transitions, then trigger those transitions based on what happens in the game. Okay, so music is done. Now to move on to... In most shoot 'em up, enemies can be divided in 4 categories. Shooters, that spawn projectiles. These can create cool rhythms and have different patterns, from simple one-direction shots to shots following the player to multiple shots. Lasers, where the enemy telegraphs the laser for a short while before firing. Attackers, that hurt the player when they enter in contact with him. And finally, spawners, that create new enemies periodically. Enemies can also move. To keep things simple, let's just make a few movement behaviors. The enemy can either move along a straight line, move along a curve, move towards the player, ricochet on level borders, or move toward a position next to the player, keeping a safe distance. With these basic building blocks, we can create a wide array of enemies. To make things even more interesting, we can even have enemies cycle through different behaviors. This can be very useful for bosses, since they will stay in the level for quite a while and we don't want them to feel too repetitive. Now, even if I'm allowing myself to create any kind of enemy possible, I still want each level to have some sort of identity. So I settled on a theme based for each music. DJ equipments for house music, skulls for the slow drum and bass, and jungle for, well, jungle. Drawing enemies is pretty straightforward, making at least 4 animations for each: a spawning animation, an idle animation, a charging animation, and a shooting animation. For bosses, I can draw multiple animations to telegraph the player which attack pattern the boss is about to do. Once I had made all the enemies I needed, it was just a matter of placing them in waves and spawning them one after the other. With that, I had the basic game done, but there are still a bunch of things to do to take it from a cool prototype to real proof of concept. Starting with pretty straightforward, simply adding a title screen, setting screen, level select, and basic animations. I had a lot of fun making the setting screen look like some sort of audio gear. And you might also see something that I find really cool with simple 4-color games, which is graphically, the game might appear simple, but there's a lot that goes into making really crisp pixel art graphics and palette swappers. Here's how the game is rendered. The first camera is looking at the game, but rather than drawing this on the screen directly, I send the camera data to a texture at a scaled down resolution. This guarantees that everything is rendered at a specific pixel resolution, which is crucial when you're doing scaling or rotations. Then, this texture is rendered on a virtual screen that is then displayed on the screen by another camera. Having the game rendered on a virtual screen means that I can apply shader effects on it. I created a shader that basically does 2 things. First, a palette swap clamping effect. This basically scans every pixel of the texture, then compares it to a reference palette to find the closest color, and draw that instead. This assures me that every color on screen will be contained in a specific palette. I can then provide another palette containing the same number of colors to easily do palette swaps. Another effect I added was dithering. This effect uses a dithering pattern to transform gray values into black and white patterns. This allows me to easily add details to more complex shapes like 3D models, while keeping everything black and white. Speaking of, okay, so I have my main gameplay running in the middle of the screen. This means that my game will be completely playable on most screen resolutions. But this also means I have a bunch of space on the side where I can add cool visuals to add to each level's identity. I've always been a fan of old car radio visualizers with random visuals bouncing to the music. So I created another camera that only renders objects to be used as background, then mirror the render so that everything is symmetrical. I can then add some simple 3D models that bounces to the music to make some nice and easy visuals for every level, based on their theme. With that in place, I was pretty happy with my proof of concept, and here's how everything looks once put together. So what's next? I didn't speak about some aspect of this proof of concept, like the scoring and combo system or controller support, but that's not the most interesting things in my opinion. I let some of my viewers on Twitch play the game, and their feedback were very encouraging. So I created a Steam page for the game. I also want to add more content like achievements, different playable characters with specific abilities or handicaps, and I will be working on more levels, music, and more complex enemies. This is where you can help. What music genres would you like to see in the game, and what cool enemy types could you see fit this music genre? Are there any other things you think could be improved? Leave your ideas in the comment below, and I will see you in the next devlog. Peace!